Hey guys, Matt aka Martillon here, and welcome to episode 3 of Mixing Music with Ableton Live, a series where I walk you through the process of how I mix my music using Ableton Live 9. In today's episode, we're going to be mainly covering the use of a reference track as well as some compression. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So just before I start this, I want to let you guys know that I recorded the entirety of this video and then realized just when I was editing it that none of the computer audio recorded because I am an idiot. So what I'm going to do, instead of just redoing the whole video, I'm going to talk you through everything that I did while recording it. So let's just start off with, I dragged in a reference track, one of my own tracks from my recently released Sunset EP, which I'll put a link to down in the description. This is Lost in Bliss. And what I did, I dragged it in and dragged the fader on the channel down and to a point where it was at kind of a similar volume to the track that we were mixing. So I'll play you this and I'll switch between the two tracks. So this is our track. This is Lost in Bliss. So kind of similar. And then what I did was I had used my Spectrum on the master channel and switched between them and tried to figure out where or what the kind of differences in the frequency spectrum between them were. So it would just play them together and then just switch between the two tracks. And what I kind of identified was that the middle range here in the track that we're mixing was a lot less present than in the reference track. So what I did, I fixed that up by adding some mid-range to the chords here. And then what I did, I moved on to a little bit of compression. So what I did, started with the bass, dragged in a normal Ableton Live compressor, as I mentioned. So there's 3 different types of native compressors in Ableton Live. You've got the compressor, the glue compressor, and the multiband dynamics, which is a multiband compressor. And so what I did, I dragged in the normal compressor onto the bass and then just used it to tame some of the transients. So I can play you, here's the bass soloed without the compressor. And here is it with the compressor. Without, with. So what it's done is kind of tame the transients and then bring everything up to a similar kind of level. And I did a very similar thing with the guitar. So I'll play without the compressor. And now with the compressor. Without. Super subtle. Again, it just kind of, it has increased in volume and loudness a little bit, but that's nothing to worry about too much. So then with the chords, what I did, instead of using a normal compressor, I used a glue compressor just because I like how it sounds. And what I did, I just used it to really, really harshly tame these transients. So I can play it for you here just quickly without the glue compressor and with the glue compressor. You can hear it's kind of introduced a few artifacts, but it's not that prominent in the whole mix, so it's okay. I'll play it to you in the context of the mix. Just kind of tames it a little bit, not too much. It's all super subtle. What I like to do with compression is, unless it's a creative effect, is to make it super subtle and just to kind of help squish everything together and nothing that's too over the top in terms of compression. Next thing I did was I grouped together the hi-hat and the shaker loop into what I call high drums and then glue compress them together. So I'll solo the group without the compressor and then this is with the compressor. So you can hear it's a similar overall loudness, similar to without the compressor, but what the compressor has done is tame the transients of the two loops combined and help switch them together to kind of bring them to a similar volume to make them feel like they're almost the same kind of loop, whereas in fact they're actually, as you know, two different loops overlaid on top of one another. So the next thing I did was a similar thing to the two percussion loops. I'll turn off the compressor here so you can familiarize yourself with these. And instead of taming the transients, what I wanted to do was actually kind of bring them out a little bit more. So instead of having a really fast attack time, I had a slower attack time and then a faster release time, less ratio of 2 as well. And what this kind of does is, if you imagine the transient kind of coming through, hitting the threshold of the compressor doesn't activate until the transient's actually kind of reached its peak, and then it brings it down before then releasing it really quickly as well. So it kind of lets the transient poke through and then compresses everything after it. So I can play you with the compressor without. You can hear it's just a little bit punchier. And that is pretty much what I did. I also went through, so I'll talk through that now. I want to just quickly discuss my panning preferences because someone asked me about that. So what you can see here, if I unfold these, is how I've panned my tracks. If you want to see that more in depth, go to episode 1 of this series, but just for a quick explanation of what I did and why I did it. So the kick, I always like to leave dead center because in dance music and all that, it is generally the kind of focal point, or it's what creates the drive of the track. And claps and snares, generally I'll leave them center unless I have 2 of them going on, in which case sometimes I'll pan them if I want them to sound separated. If I want them to sound together, then I'll leave them in the same place in the frequency spectrum. Like if I want them to sound like they're layered and they are the same instrument, then I'll kind of leave them together in the same space in the spatial spectrum. With the hi-hats and shaker loops and percussion loops, what I kind of tend to do or try to do is balance them out. So if I pan a hi-hat loop to the left, then if I have another kind of shaker loop, what I'll try and do is pan it to the right a similar amount so that it kind of balances out. It's like a seesaw. You don't want it to be too unbalanced in terms of the spatial spectrum. And that is a kind of philosophy that I like to apply to my mixing in general. So you can see here I've got these 2 percussion loops, and they're also panned kind of similarly towards opposite sides. So for example, if I had this hi-hat loop panned all the way to the left, what I'd want to do is pan this shaker loop all the way to the right. And I can just show you what that would sound like. I'm not a huge fan of hard panning, but in some cases it does work really nicely, especially if you're kind of sweeping from side to side, but that's more of a creative thing rather than a technical mixing thing. With instruments, what I kind of tend to do is figure out what I would like the focal point of the instruments to be. And if there are 2 kind of focal points, or if the focal point is clashing with another kind of instrument in a similar kind of frequency spectrum, what I'll then do is, again, try to balance them out with panning. So that's what I've done here with the ARP and the guitars. So you can see I've panned them similarly. And if I just solo them together, by having that panning, what it's done is separate them in the spatial spectrum, allowing you to be able to more clearly identify what they are. Even though the guitar is probably more of the focal point because it's more of like a melody, it's still okay to have it panned because you're creating clarity for it as well as the arpeggio, which is cool. And so the chords, what they do, they don't really need to be clear or discernible, but they just provide the harmonic backing as well as giving everything else some context, but they don't need to be clearly discernible. They don't need to be at the forefront of the mix. Bass, I always like to leave generally dead center. Sometimes I'll spread out the higher frequencies of it in the spatial spectrum using some kind of stereo enhancement. But other than that, I tend to leave it dead center for a similar reason as the kick, in that it's generally quite a driving force and also provides the harmonic foundation, much like the chords do, but in much more of a way that you can kind of feel it rather than you hear it, especially on bigger sound systems. And with the effects, again, just a similar kind of thing in that I'm balancing it out in terms of the spatial spectrum. So I've got the reverse one here, pan to the left, and the short noise pan to the right, to kind of balance the two of them out. And that is what I like to do with my panning, in order to create a balanced mix, both in terms of frequency and space. In the next video, what I'll probably do is go over some more in-depth compression when I go over how I like to bus and group my tracks together. I might go over some reverb if I feel like there is any need for that, and maybe some more creative kind of effects as well. That's it for this video. I know it was a bit short and sweet, but hopefully you enjoyed and found it useful. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're enjoying my content, consider heading over to and supporting me on Patreon. The link is down in the description below. Feel free to leave any questions you have down in the comment section below as well, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks so much for watching, guys. My name is Martin, and I'll see you in the next video.